14th on our list is the Seychelles, another island country in the Indian Ocean. Seychelles, or the Seychelles, you could use either, is far enough north that you could consider it part of East Africa, but for simplicity's sake it's being treated as Southern Africa. The Seychelles Islands comprise 155 named islands. Most are pretty small and uninhabited. They're divided into two main groups, inner and outer. The inner islands sit on an ancient chunk of Gondwana land, now the northern part of the Mascarene Plateau. They are, in fact, the world's oldest islands, not connected to a continental shelf, and the only oceanic islands made mainly of granite, hence the term granitic islands. The three largest are Mai, Prale, and Silhouette. These 42 islands are joined by two small coral islands, Denny and Bird. The outer islands, in contrast, are all volcanic in origin, though the volcanoes are long dead. Southeast of the granitic Seychelles are the southern coral islands, Île Plate and Coativi. Southwest lie the 26 Amarante Islands. De Roche, the rock, is the largest. South of those are the three Alphonse Islands. Further south are the 13 Farquhar Islands, and to the west of those are the 67 Aldabra Islands. The largest is Aldabra itself. These outer islands are mostly atolls, with rich coral reefs. Seychelles is close to the equator, and has a pleasant tropical climate. The northern islands experience rainfall year-round, while further south the climate is more seasonal, with a wet November to April, dry May to October. Islands are always hotspots for ecological diversity, and Seychelles is no exception. Reefs home to hundreds of species of sea life, and forests home to species of birds and reptiles found nowhere else. Aldabra, with its seasonal climate and little groundwater, has dry shrublands. It is, however, home to a species of giant tortoise, the only other place in the world besides the Galapagos Islands. See, giant tortoises used to be found all over the Seychelles, and on the Mascarene Islands, and Madagascar, and in fact most continents in the world. Being slow and steady, they relied on their shells for defense, but a hungry human is a dangerous thing. They have since gone extinct most everywhere else, but managed to survive on the uninhabited Galapagos and Aldabra Islands. Efforts have been made to reintroduce them to other islands in the Seychelles. Like neighboring island groups, it's highly likely Austronesian, Arab, and Swahili sailors encountered the Seychelles, but they offered little to those first explorers. Aldabra's name survives from this era, from Arabic al-Khadra, the green, referring to the lagoon. Vasco da Gama sighted them in 1503, but only in 1609 did English sailors land on one of the islands. Seychelles were again ignored as Portuguese, French, Dutch, and English set up shop around the region. 1742, French East India Company Governor of Île-de-France, Bertrand François Mahé de la Bourdonnais, was interested in charting the islands, giving his name to the largest. However, only with the outbreak of the 7 Years' War in 1754 did the French actively try to settle them. It isn't clear exactly when France claimed all of these islands individually. To make it easier, we'll just say it was in 1756 when l'Établissement, the settlement, was founded. France's then finance minister Viscount Jean Moreau de Seychelles gave his name to the whole group, a part of the company's colony of Île-de-France. The company didn't get to enjoy their new possession before bankruptcy and acquisition by the Crown in 1769. About the only thing that was successful on the Seychelles was harvesting of local trees and tortoises. Other than that, spice-growing enterprises failed. To exploit these resources, slaves from Île-de-France were brought over, the beginnings of the Seychellois people. Seychelles' only real claim to fame was its location along a quicker route to India. The British realized this and took the islands in 1794 during the French Revolutionary Wars. Under British occupation, Seychelles became a stopover for all traffic to and from India and began to prosper. The 1810 capture of Île-de-France merely confirmed the situation, and in 1814 Seychelles was handed over to Britain along with most of the former French colony, now Mauritius. British Seychelles was largely left alone, the French landowners and their Creole slaves continuing as they had for decades. It kind of faded into a backwater and was never very wealthy. Abolition of slavery in 1835 freed many of its people, though they continued to work the coconut plantations. 1841, L'Établissement was renamed Victoria after the reigning queen, one of many places to receive that honor. Also, at some point, the French spelling gave way to the modern English spelling. The end of the slave trade did not end the demand for labor. and like Réunion and Mauritius, Seychelles satisfied its demand with Asians. China and India have always had lots and lots of people, and supply and demand. So, cheap labor was brought over from those countries to the Seychelles. Some things never change. And the four main groups of Seychellois coalesced: white, mainly French, Creoles, African and mixed, Indians, and Chinese. Despite being a dependency of Mauritius, Seychelles never enjoyed the arrangement, so distant from authorities with little understanding or regard for them. Mauritius apparently had its own hang-ups about administering Seychelles, and in 1903, the islands were detached as a separate colony. In 1914, France granted concessions in the Glorioso Islands for Seychelles to develop them, though not much came of it. World War I was not a positive for the islands, as traffic to and from basically stopped. In the interwar period, attempts were made by the British to develop the colony, but the Great Depression limited its impact. Finally, after the Second World War, reforms were implemented for things like higher wages and better working conditions. 1948, the first elections were held, but the franchise was limited. The landowners continued to dominate Seychellois politics and missed out on the wave of African decolonization in the 60s. 1958, France bought the Gloriosa concessions back. In 1964, two parties emerged: the Seychelles People's United Party, advocating for independence, and the Seychelles Democratic Party, preferring continued British rule. The SPUP were probably miffed when in 1965 Britain created the Indian Ocean Territory, mainly with the Chagos Islands, but also the islands of Desroches, Farquhar, and Aldabra. I didn't find anything specifying if the cession consisted of the individual islands or their respective groups. I assume the former. British policy in the 1960s and 70s was to release their colonies, but in a managed, controlled way. 1970, Seychelles became self-governing, and in 1976, it was granted independence. The Republic of Seychelles immediately regained the islands it had lost to the Indian Ocean Territory, and continued to claim Glorioso. A pro-British government was soon dashed in 1979 when President James Marchand was deposed by France-Albert Rene. He rebranded the SPUP to the Seychelles People's Progressive Front and established one-party rule, setting up a socialist republic. Rene weathered coups and political violence, but despite amounting to an authoritarian dictator, his domestic policies increased education and healthcare, and saw a dramatic expansion of the Seychellois economy. Tourism and fishing emerged as dominant industries, as agriculture declined. It's honestly quite astounding just how much the economy and standard of living grew during the decades after independence. The end of the Cold War made democracy fashionable in Africa, and Rene followed suit, reconciling with Marchand. In 1993, multi-party elections were held. Rene still won. 2001, Seychelles finally agreed that, yes, Glorioso belonged to France. Rene resigned in 2004, and his successor James Michel took over. The SPPF only lost election in 2020, some 40 years since taking power. Despite the dominance of the SPPF, elections have been free and fair. It was just that popular. Good reason, too, because the Seychellois people are considered the wealthiest in Africa, and the least corrupt. Rene was the rare type of dictator who wasn't just out for himself and his cronies. Certainly an interesting lesson to take from history. All right! Wow, we did it! All of southern Africa, and some places I put there for convenience. Well, now we move on to Central Africa. Wait, what are these? Oh, that's right. Next time we'll take a quick look at the British islands of St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha. See you then.